Before we begin, one thing you should know. This is a story, a piece of Appalachian folk horror told the old way. In the dark, close to the fire, the way these mountains have always told their worst ones. It did not happen, not like this. But stay with me to the end, because what these hills actually did to people is somehow worse. Now, let me tell it right. In the spring of 1897, a boy chasing a lost dog found a door in the ground. It was set into the hillside above Ashgrove Hollow, half swallowed by ivy, banded with iron gone orange with rust. He pried it open because he was 9, and curious, and did not yet know that some doors are kept shut for a reason. Down those stairs, in the cold and the dark, he counted men. 31 of them, chained to the walls. Some had been there so long the iron had grown into the stone around their wrists, and every single one of them turned, slow, and looked at him. This is the story of the Ashgrove Sisters, the cellar beneath their farm, and the thing the people of that hollow swore they would never speak of again. If stories like this are the reason you're here, do one thing before we go down those steps. Subscribe. This channel lives in the dark corners of Appalachian legend, and there's a new one every week. That's it. Now grab a light. We're going into the cellar. To understand what was found under that hill, you have to understand the hollow that hid it. Ashgrove Hollow was the kind of place the maps forgot on purpose. A slit in the mountains where the sun showed up late and left early, where the fog sat in the low ground until noon and came back before supper. A hard place, a quiet one. The people who lived there were the descendants of folks who had climbed up into those ridges to get away from something and had never quite decided to come back down. They married close, buried their own, and answered questions from strangers with the fewest words a body could use. At the head of the hollow, past the last church and the last honest fence, sat the Ashgrove farm. Prudence and Mercy Ashgrove had lived there their whole lives. 2 sisters, a few years apart, raised by a father who prayed like he was arguing and drank like he was losing. When he died in the winter of 1891, frozen in his barn, the sisters buried him without a preacher and kept the farm running alone. And for a while, that was all anyone knew about them. 2 women, up the hollow, keeping to themselves. Nobody thought that was strange. In those mountains, keeping to yourself was a virtue. But the men started going missing not long after the father died. At first, it was the kind of missing that nobody counts. A drifter who'd been sleeping in the church loft, gone one morning with his pack still hanging on the nail. A timberman walking back to the camp who never got there. A peddler with a cart of tin cups and ribbon who came up the hollow road one October and was simply never seen coming down it. A young preacher, passing through, who told the store he'd go pay his respects at the farm at the head of the hollow, and was never heard from again. These were not men the world came looking for. That was the terrible thing about Ashgrove Hollow, and about a lot of places like it. The men who vanished were the men nobody would miss. No wives, no addresses. No one to write a letter asking where they'd got to. So the hollow told itself the usual comforts. He moved on. He fell in the river. He went west. And every one of those comforts walked the same road, past the same last fence, past the Ashgrove farm. There was a man named Elias Ward who noticed. He kept the store at the mouth of the hollow, and a storekeeper remembers who owes him. He started keeping a second list, not of debts, of names. Men who came up the road and never came back for their goods. By the winter of 1896, that list had 11 names on it. Elias Ward would be the 12th. Ward went up the hollow road himself, that last winter, to settle a debt the sisters owed on flour. He told his wife he'd be back by dark. He carried his ledger with him, the one with the 11 names in it, because Elias Ward was a careful man, and careful men bring their books. Neither the man nor the ledger ever came back down. His wife stood at the store window for 3 days before she understood that the window was all she had left to do. Here is what the hollow noticed, in the last year, and told itself to forget. The Ashgrove Sisters bought more than 2 women could eat, salt by the barrel, meal by the sack. They said they were putting up stores against a hard winter, and nobody argued, because arguing meant walking up that road. There was a sound, some nights, carried down on the fog. The Wilkes family lived nearest, close enough to hear it, and they described it 3 different ways to 3 different people, which is how you know they didn't want to say it plain. A knocking, a dragging, and under both low and even, something they only ever called the singing. And there was the smell that came off the far side of the Ashgrove hill when the wind turned. Not rot, exactly, colder than rot. The Wilkes girl said it smelled like the inside of a well. Nobody went up to check. You have to understand that. In a place like that hollow, a closed door is a kind of law. You do not open what your neighbour has chosen to shut. So the door in the hillside stayed shut, and the singing kept on, and the list of names kept growing, right up until a 9-year-old boy chased a dog he never did catch. His name was Tom Wilkes, and he was the one who told it, over and over, for the rest of his long and sleepless life. The dog went to ground at the base of the Ashgrove hill, at a door Tom had never seen, because it was made not to be seen. He got it open. He went down. Later he could never say why. He was 9. Some part of 9 years old still believes the dark is only a room with the lamp out. The stairs went down further than the hill should have allowed. That was the first wrong thing. He counted the steps going down and got a number that made no sense with the size of the mound above him. Then the cold. Then the smell of the well. Then the light of the doorway behind him showing him the walls, and the iron rings set into the walls, and the men chained to the rings. 31 of them. Some were long past. Bones in the shape of a sitting man, the chains still holding what the years had left. But some were not past. Some turned their heads. Some had eyes that found the boy in the doorway and held on. And not one of them screamed, or begged, or reached for him. They only looked, like men who had been waiting a very long time, and had forgotten what waiting was for. The last thing Tom Wilkes saw before he ran was at the far end of the cellar. 2 chairs, set facing the chained men, the way you'd set chairs to watch a show, and on the arm of one chair, folded neat, a woman's shawl. The sisters had been sitting with them. Not for a night, not for a season. The dust worn smooth on the arm of that second chair told its own count. Whoever had last sat there had sat there often, and long, and without any hurry at all. They had made a habit of the dark. They had grown comfortable in it, the way you only grow comfortable in a thing you have done 1,000 times. I need to stop here for a second, because this next part is where the story goes from a fright to something that sits in your chest. I wrote a full companion to this one. The extended version of the tale, the parts I had to cut for time, and then my own notes on the real Appalachian history I built this fiction on top of. What actually happened up in these hollows, who actually vanished, and why nobody came looking. It's not evidence of anything. It's a story and the true history behind it, laid side by side, so you can see the seams. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Grab it if you want the whole thing. Then come back, because you need to know what the town did next. The men in that cellar were not being killed. That was the part the hollow could never make peace with. They were being kept. Prudence Ashgrove, in the one account we have of her speaking of it, called it feeding the hill. Their father had believed it before them, his father before him. The story that ran in that family, down in the dark under the prayers and the drink, was that the hollow was old, older than any church, and hungry, and that it had made a bargain with the first Ashgrove who ever climbed up into it. The hill would keep the family safe. Fed, frozen in one place, never rising, never falling, never touched by the sickness or the hunger that took everyone else. And in return, the hill wanted company. Not blood, not death, company. Living men kept living, kept down in the cold where the hill could sit close to them. The singing the Wilkes family heard was Prudence and Mercy, down in the dark, singing to the chained so they wouldn't go quiet too soon. Because a man who gave up died fast, and the hill did not want them dead, it wanted them there. 31 men, some kept alive for years, fed just enough, sung to just enough. Sitting in the cold with 2 sisters in 2 chairs, keeping something under a mountain company, so that up top, in the light, 2 women would never have to grow old or sick or afraid. That was the bargain. That was the cellar. And when Tom Wilkes ran up those impossible stairs and out into the daylight screaming, that was the end of it. Here is where the story turns from horror into something colder, because the men of Ashgrove Hollow did not call the law. They went up the road. A dozen of them, with lanterns and rope and one old rifle, the way men go when they've decided a thing before they've said it out loud. What happened at the Ashgrove farm that night was never written down, because the men who did it agreed, right there, that it never would be. The sisters were not seen again. The farm burned 3 nights later, and nobody in that hollow ever admitted to striking the match, and nobody ever asked. The door in the hillside was filled. Not just shut, filled. The men brought stone and dirt and packed that stairway solid, with whatever was still down there, and they laid a course of stone over the top and left it. They did not free the men in the cellar. Sit with that, because the hollow never could. Whatever the reason, and there are only bad ones, the men who found that cellar chose to bury it whole rather than open it to the light and answer the questions that opening it would raise. 31 men and 2 sisters, sealed under a hill by a town that decided the cheapest thing to do with a horror is to pretend it was never there. And it worked. For a while, it worked. The disappearances stopped. The singing stopped. The hollow went back to being quiet and hard and forgotten, and the men who buried the door died old in their beds and took it with them. Some of them never spoke another word about that night. Not to their wives, not to their sons, not even to each other when they passed on the road. They had made a pact of silence heavier than any confession, and they carried it the way you carry a stone in your coat, quiet and close and always there. A few took to drink, 1 or 2 took to religion. Most just took to looking at that hill a little too long when they thought no one was watching. All but one. Tom Wilkes lived to be 91 years old. He never left the hollow, and he never went near that hill again, and every person who knew him in his last years said the same thing. The old man did not sleep. He'd sit up on his porch through the dark with a lamp burning, every night, until the light came. Somebody asked him once, near the end, why he kept the lamp lit. He said it wasn't for him. He said down in that cellar, all those years ago, every one of those chained men had been looking at him, and he had run. He had left them there, and the town had buried them there, and he had spent his whole long life knowing they were still under that hill in the cold and the dark, waiting for a boy who was never coming back. He kept the lamp lit, he said, so that if any of them ever did get out, they'd have one light to walk toward. He died with it burning. And up above Ashgrove Hollow, if you know where the maps forgot to look, there is still a course of old stone laid over a filled-in stairway. Nobody has ever dug it up. Nobody in that country ever will. Because some doors are kept shut for a reason, and the worst reason of all is not knowing what would look back at you if you opened them. Now I stop telling stories. Because you deserve to know where I stopped making things up. The Ashgrove Sisters were never real. There was no cellar, no 31 men, no bargain with a hungry hill. I invented all of it. But I did not invent it out of nothing, and this is the part that should actually keep you up. Across Appalachia and the wider South in exactly this era, there were real systems that kept men in chains and let them die where no one would come looking. After the Civil War, states leased convicts, most of them black men, arrested on charges invented to fill quotas, to private mines and camps and railroads. Men were worked and chained in conditions so lethal that in some camps a large share of them did not survive the year. Companies replaced the dead by ordering more, because a leased man was cheaper to bury than to keep alive. That is real. That is documented. That happened, and the people who profited from it wrote it down in their own ledgers as a cost of doing business. And the reason my invented sisters could make men vanish and have nobody ask is real too. Isolated company towns and labour camps ran on men with no families nearby, no records, no one to write a letter asking where they'd got to. When those men disappeared, into a mine collapse, into a fever, into an unmarked grave, the disappearance often went uncounted, for the exact reason I gave in the story. Not because a hill was hungry. Because of who the world had already decided not to look for. The folk horror is a mask. The thing under the mask is a real history of people kept and worked and buried and forgotten on purpose. If this story got under your skin, let that be the part that stays. The monster was never a pair of witches in the woods. It was a system that found men nobody would miss, and made sure of it. That's the story of the Ashgrove Sisters' cellar. Fiction, laid over a real darkness these mountains actually carried. If you want the extended tale, and my full notes on the true history behind it, both are in that companion below. And if this is the kind of story you want more of, the honest kind, the kind that tells you where the fiction ends, subscribe. There's a new one every week, and the next one is already up on your screen. Go watch it. Just maybe leave a light on.